People often think that family is a safety net, the one place you can go when the world turns its back on you. My name is Elena, and for the longest time, I believed that too. But I learned the hard way that sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones waiting for the perfect moment to erase you entirely. Growing up, I was always the invisible child. My parents were obsessed with my older brother, Julian. Whatever he wanted, he got. Whatever mess he made, I was the one expected to clean it up. I spent years working double shifts, sacrificing my own education and my own dreams, just so I could help keep the family business afloat while they showered him with praise and funding. I thought if I just did enough, if I just worked hard enough, they would finally see me. I was wrong. 3 months ago, I finally hit my breaking point. I left. I didn't make a scene, I didn't scream or cry. I simply packed a suitcase, closed the door on a life that was killing me, and moved into a small apartment just 10 blocks away from my childhood home. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted peace. But apparently, my absence was inconvenient for them. 2 weeks ago, I was walking to the grocery store when I saw a familiar face, my aunt. She looked right through me, her eyes filled with tears, clutching a crumpled flyer. I stopped, confused, until I saw the photo on that paper. It was a picture of me from 5 years ago. And in bold, black letters at the top, it read, "Missing." I stood there, paralyzed on the sidewalk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I watched my aunt walk past me, shaking her head as she showed the missing poster to a stranger. It was surreal. They weren't looking for me because they missed me. I knew my parents too well for that. I followed her at a safe distance, my mind racing. She stopped at a local cafe and met my mother. From behind a pillar, I heard every word. "Any news?" my mother asked, her voice sounding perfectly strained, like a practice stage performance. "Nothing," my aunt sighed. "The police are getting suspicious, though. They asked why they weren't notified sooner. I told them she was impulsive, that she often takes off without telling anyone." My mother scoffed, taking a sip of her coffee. "Let them be suspicious. We need the narrative to be that she's a troubled girl who ran away. If she's missing, the bank can't finalize the foreclosure on her trust account. If she's gone, that money stays frozen in limbo for 7 years, and with our current debt, we need every cent of that interest to keep the house." I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't just left, I had inadvertently become a financial asset they were trying to liquidate by playing the grieving, desperate parents. I realized then that they weren't searching for their daughter. They were scouting for a loophole to rob me blind. I knew I couldn't just walk up to them, they would spin the story to make me look unstable or ungrateful. I needed to act, but I needed to do it without them knowing I was still in the same city. I went home that night and sat in the dark. My phone buzzing with notifications from family members posting public, heartfelt messages on social media, begging me to come home. They were using my face to gather sympathy and support, making themselves look like the victims of a runaway child. I decided to play their game, but with much higher stakes. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account they were so desperate to access. I had been paying the taxes and fees on that account for years, unbeknownst to them, which gave me remote administrative access. I didn't drain the account, that would have alerted them immediately. Instead, I initiated an account security lock, and link it to a new identity verification process that required in-person biometric scanning at the main branch downtown. The next morning, I saw the chaos unfold through social media. My mother was posting frantically about how worried she was because she was having troubles accessing my records to settle my debts. She was clearly trying to force the bank to release the funds under the guise of an emergency. By noon, I received a notification from the bank. Someone had tried to override the lock. I knew they would be heading to the bank branch in person to demand answers. I spent the next hour putting on a hoodie, a cap, and glasses, and I headed to that very same bank branch. I didn't go to talk to them, I went to talk to the manager. I walked straight to the VIP desk, my heart racing, and handed over my legal identification and a pre-prepared folder of documents proving my identity and my employment status. I understand there's an investigation regarding my status as a missing person, I said, keeping my voice steady. I am here to tell you that I am not missing. And I'm here to file a report regarding identity fraud. Part 4. The bank manager stared at me, then at the computer screen, and finally back at my ID. He took a long, heavy breath and stood up. Ms. Elena, I think you should step into my private office immediately. Your parents are currently in the main lobby, and they have been quite vocal about your whereabouts. I followed him, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally reclaiming control. Through the glass walls of the office, I saw them. My mother was gesturing wildly at a teller, her face contorted in a mask of manufactured concern, while my father stood behind her, looking grim. They were putting on a show for everyone in the branch, painting the picture of the devastated parents looking for their lost daughter. The manager didn't even have to call security. He simply signaled to the assistant manager, who walked over to my parents and whispered something in my mother's ear. I watched her face transform instantly, from performative grief to cold, hard fury. She looked toward the manager's office, and our eyes locked. She stopped dead in her tracks. The mask had completely slipped. The manager turned to me, his tone professional and protective. They have been trying to claim a hardship exemption on your accounts for weeks, citing your disappearance. Because of this, I have been legally obligated to gather documentation from them. Now that you are here, that changes everything. Would you like me to call the police to report the attempted fraud, or would you prefer to handle this directly with them? I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was ready to face them, not as the missing daughter they wanted to exploit, but as the woman who had finally woken up. My mother marched into the office, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor, with my father trailing closely behind, looking more embarrassed than concerned. "You ridiculous girl," she hissed, not bothering to lower her voice even though other customers were watching. "Do you have any idea the mess you've caused? We have been looking for you everywhere. Get your things, you are coming home right now to fix this." I didn't flinch. I just leaned back in the manager's chair and folded my arms. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "And I'm certainly not going to fix the financial fraud you just attempted." My father stepped forward, trying to use his authoritative tone. "Elena, don't be dramatic. We're your parents. We had to do what was necessary to secure the family assets. You've been gone for months without a word. We were worried sick." "Worried sick?" I laughed, a sharp, cold sound. You were worried that you'd lose your lifestyle, so you tried to declare me legally incapacitated to get your hands on my money. I've been living 3 miles away this entire time. I've been working. I've been paying my own bills. You didn't find me because you didn't look for a person, you were looking for a paycheck. The bank manager cleared his throat, holding up a file. Mr. and Mrs. Last name, your daughter has just filed a formal statement rescinding any claims of her being missing. And she has provided evidence of your recent attempts to access her accounts under false pretenses. I suggest you leave the premises before I involve the authorities to press charges for attempted identity theft. The color drained from my mother's face. She opened her mouth to argue, but the look in the manager's eyes told her he wasn't bluffing. She turned, gave me a look of pure venom, and stormed out. My father followed, not looking back once. I sat there in the silence of the office, finally breathing in air that felt completely mine. As I walked out of the bank 10 minutes later, the sunlight hit my face in a way it never had before. For the first time, I wasn't just the daughter or the provider, I was just me. But the battle wasn't over. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was blowing up with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother had already spun a new version of the truth. According to her, I had lost my mind, stolen from the family business, and was currently hiding out to avoid legal consequences. My cousin, the one who usually acted as the family spy, texted me, Elena, they are coming to your apartment with the police. They have a lawyer. Give up now and come home, or this will get very ugly. I didn't panic. I had expected this move. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I had been building for months. It wasn't just bank records. It was a digital diary of every time they had forced me to pay their debts, every contract I had been coerced into signing. And recorded audio of my father admitting that they were using me as a financial breach. I uploaded the entire file to a private cloud server and sent the link to the local precinct's detective, the same one who had originally been handling the missing person report. I also sent a copy to the family lawyer, with a note, if you represent them in any legal action against me, this evidence goes public. Choose wisely. I locked my door, sat on my couch, and turned off my phone. I knew they would be knocking on my door soon. But this time, I wasn't the scared girl running away. I was the person who held all the cards, and I was ready for the final showdown. Part 7. Less than an hour later, I heard the heavy thud of a fist against my door. It wasn't the police, it was my father. He was alone, which surprised me. Through the peephole, I could see him pacing, his face flushed with an ugly combination of rage and desperation. Elena! Open the door, he shouted, his voice cracking. You have no idea what you've done. You've humiliated this family. If you don't come out and talk to us, I'll make sure you regret the day you decided to leave. I didn't open the door. I walked over to the speaker I'd set up against the frame, connected to my laptop. I played a clean, crisp recording of his own voice, the one from 3 months ago where he admitted he had been siphoning my savings to pay off his gambling debts. The silence that followed was absolute. He stopped pacing instantly. I have copies of everything, Dad, I said, my voice projecting clearly through the door, steady and cold. The police already have the file. The lawyer has the file. You aren't here to bring me home. You're here to bully me into silence so you don't go to prison. But here's the thing, I'm not scared of you anymore. You have exactly 10 minutes to leave this building before I call the police and tell them exactly where you are, and that you're harassing me. I heard him stumble back. He started to stammer, trying to pivot to his usual guilt-tripping tactics. Elena, please, your mother is sick. We didn't mean to. 10 minutes, I repeated. I sat back down and watched the clock. The silence in the hallway felt like a victory. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was finally winning. The 10 minutes felt like an eternity, but I didn't move from my spot. I kept my eyes fixed on the clock on my wall, listening to the heavy, uneven breathing from the other side of the door. My father didn't knock again, but he didn't leave either. He was trying to decide if I was bluffing. Finally, at the 9-minute mark, I pulled out my phone and dialed the local precinct's non-emergency line. I didn't even have to start speaking before I heard the distinct sound of footsteps scurrying away down the hallway. He had been listening, and he had realized that I wasn't just another victim to be manipulated anymore. I was a threat to the life he had built on a foundation of lies. I didn't hang up immediately. I waited until the building's front door closed with a firm click. Only then did I let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding for 5 years. But I knew this was just the beginning. Even if they stayed away today, they wouldn't stop trying to find a way to maintain control. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a notebook. I began listing every asset, every shared account, and every legal tie I still had with them. It was time to systematically dismantle every single one of them. I was no longer the daughter who cleaned up their messes. I was the one who was going to make sure they faced the consequences for every single one of them. Over the next week, the silence from my parents was deafening. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from resolution, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator waiting in the brush. I didn't let my guard down. I spent my days contacting financial institutions, closing joint accounts, and ensuring my credit was locked down tight so they couldn't attempt any more fraudulent hardship claims. The real surprise came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, sitting in my office, when I received a notification from my building security app. Someone was at my door again. But this time, it wasn't my parents. It was a process server. He left a legal notice taped to my door, which the building manager scanned and emailed to me. It wasn't a lawsuit from my parents, surprisingly. It was a formal cease and desist order from my brother, Julian. Apparently, my parents had convinced him that I was holding family assets hostage, and that I was the one responsible for the financial ruin they were facing. Julian, that golden child, who had never worked a real day in his life, was now legally trying to force me to turn over my personal savings to save the family home. He was their final weapon. They knew they couldn't reach me anymore, so they were poisoning the only person I still had a flicker of soft spot for. I looked at the document on my screen, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt a genuine, cold clarity. They were doubling down on their lies, and they were willing to use my own brother to tear me down completely. I realized then that there would be no reconciliation. There would only be a war of attrition, and if they wanted a legal battle, I was going to give them one they would never recover from. I didn't waste a single second responding to Julian's pathetic cease and desist. Instead, I used his own legal action against him. By filing that document, he had inadvertently provided me with the missing piece of the puzzle, a sworn statement signed by him, claiming he had no knowledge of the family's financial dealings. I contacted the lawyer I had been working with, a specialist in forensic accounting, and told him everything. If Julian claims he's ignorant of the family finances, then he can't be a beneficiary of the assets they illegally siphoned from my accounts, I explained. We didn't just countersue, we filed a motion to freeze all assets related to the family business pending a full investigation into the source of their capital. The backlash was instant. Within 48 hours, the family business accounts were audited by the state. My parents' attempts to maintain the illusion of wealth crumbled overnight. My mother tried to call me a dozen times, her voice shifting from angry threats to desperate, sobbing pleas, but I never picked up. I redirected all communication to my legal team. Then, the final domino fell. The police reached out to me with the results of their investigation into the missing person report my parents had filed. They had found enough evidence to charge my parents not just with fraud, but with filing a false police report and orchestrating a criminal conspiracy to misappropriate my funds. I walked into the police station to sign the official complaint, and I saw them. They were sitting in the waiting area, looking small, tired, and utterly defeated. My mother looked up, her eyes wide with shock as she saw me walk in with my lawyer, completely composed and in control. She realized then that the daughter they had treated as invisible for years was now the person standing in the way of their entire future. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just walked past them, sat down, and finally, closed the chapter on the people who had tried to erase me. The police station was cold, but for the first time in years, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest. As I sat in the interrogation room giving my final statement, I realized that I wasn't just clearing my name, I was dismantling the entire structure of lies they had built around me. My parents were being processed in the next room, and through the thin walls, I could hear my mother's voice rising in a shrill, desperate protest. She was trying to blame my father, while my father was blaming Julian. It was the ultimate betrayal, the very thing they had spent a lifetime trying to hide, now laid bare in a sterile, government office. My lawyer leaned in close. Elena, with the evidence we've provided, the prosecutor is going to pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. But there is one thing you need to be prepared for, Julian. He hasn't been arrested yet, but he's currently under investigation for his role in the unauthorized transfer of funds. He's looking for a way out, and he might come to you, begging for mercy. I look at the detective, then at my lawyer. I've spent my life being the person who gives mercy to people who would never dream of giving it to me, I said firmly. This ends today. For all of them. No more deals, no more family loyalty as an excuse for theft, and absolutely no more secrets. I signed the final document, confirming that I wanted to press full criminal charges against all three of them. As I stood up to leave, I saw Julian walk into the station. He looked terrified. He caught my eye, and for a split second, I saw the brother I used to love. But then I looked at the files in my hand, the evidence of how they had systematically tried to destroy my future, and that image of my brother vanished, replaced by the cold reality of who they actually were. Julian didn't even get 10 feet toward me before an officer intercepted him. He looked broken, his expensive clothes wrinkled, his eyes darting around the room as if hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. When he finally looked at me, he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "Elena, please, they told me it was my money. They told me you had abandoned the family and left it for me." I stopped in my tracks. Even at the bitter end, they were still using him as a puppet, feeding him the same poisonous narratives they had used on me for years. It was almost pathetic how easily he had let them lead him into the fire. "They lied to you, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Just like they lied to me, and just like they've lied to everyone who ever cared about them. If you want to find someone to blame, don't look at the sister you tried to rob. Look at the people who raised you to be exactly what you are." I turned my back on him. I didn't wait to hear his response, and I didn't care if he tried to call out my name. As I walked out of the station and back into the cool night air, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying until it was finally gone. My phone started to vibrate in my pocket. It was a new number, likely an attorney trying to negotiate a settlement, or perhaps another relative calling to demand I keep the family secret. I took the phone out, looked at the screen for a moment, and then powered it off completely. I walked toward my car, knowing that tomorrow would be the first day of a life that was truly, entirely mine. But before I could pull away, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same car I'd seen lingering near my apartment for the past 3 nights. I froze. The sedan was parked in the shadows, its engine silent, but the headlights gave a quick, rhythmic flash, once, twice, 3 times. It was a signal. My heart skipped a beat, but for once, it wasn't fear that took over, it was pure, calculated defiance. I didn't get into my car. Instead, I pulled my phone back out, turned it on, and called the detective who had just finished my statement inside. "There's a black sedan parked across the street from the precinct," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the vehicle. "They've been following me for days. I think they're trying to intimidate me one last time." The officer nodded and signaled to a patrol car sitting at the exit of the station. Within seconds, the patrol car pulled out, lights flashing, and blocked the sedan's path before it could move. I watched as the driver, a man I'd never seen before, was forced to step out of the car. It wasn't my parents, and it wasn't Julian. The detective walked out to meet me, holding a folder he'd retrieved from the vehicle. His face was grave. "Elena, you were right to call. This man isn't just some random stalker. He's a private investigator hired by a shell company, the same one your parents were using to hide their offshore assets." He handed me a tablet showing the digital trail they had been trying to cover up. "They weren't just after your savings," he added quietly. "They were using your identity to launder money for much bigger players. If you hadn't come forward when you did, you would have been the one taking the fall for this when the federal authorities finally caught up." The cold truth washed over me. This wasn't just a petty family drama over money. I had been a pawn in a criminal game far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The game was truly over now, but the revelation left me staring at the dark street, realizing that escaping my family was only the beginning of protecting my own life. I stood under the harsh glare of the precinct's streetlights, the tablet weighing heavy in my hands. The realization that I had been a potential fall guy for a money laundering scheme made my skin crawl. It wasn't just about greed anymore, it was about survival. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the cool night air. The detective looked at the man being handcuffed against the hood of the sedan. "Now, we flip him. He's the link between your family's shell company and the larger organization. If he talks, your parents' legal troubles are about to get significantly worse. And you? You are officially a protected witness. The irony hit me like a physical blow. The family that had tried to erase my existence had inadvertently handed me the key to their total destruction. I had spent years running from their shadow, only to realize that by standing my ground and reporting them, I had inadvertently stumbled into a federal investigation that would dismantle their entire world. I didn't head home that night. I was taken to a secure location where I spent hours detailing every interaction, every coerced signature, and every suspicious transaction I had been forced to witness. By the time I stepped out into the morning light, I was exhausted, but for the first time, I felt a sense of finality. My phone, which had been off for hours, was filled with missed calls and frantic voicemails, not from my parents, but from lawyers desperately trying to reach me. I deleted them all without listening. I checked my bank account one last time, transferred the remaining funds to a new, secure account that no one in my family could touch, and deleted my digital footprints. The old Elena, the one who was constantly missing, searching, and pleading, was finally gone. 2 weeks passed in a blur of depositions and legal meetings. My parents and brother were finally remanded to custody, unable to make bail because the federal authorities had frozen every asset linked to their name. The missing person case was officially closed, replaced by a massive fraud and money laundering indictment that was making headlines across the state. I spent those days in hiding, moving between temporary accommodations provided by the Witness Protection Protocol. It was a strange, lonely existence, but it was quiet. No one was demanding my money, no one was gaslighting me about my past, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own life. On a rainy Tuesday, my lead attorney called me. "Elena, it's over. Your parents have entered a plea deal. They've admitted to everything, including the attempt to use you as a scapegoat for their crimes. The judge has scheduled sentencing for next month." I hung up the phone and walked to the window of the safe house, watching the rain wash away the grime on the glass. I thought about the girl who had run away with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of doubt. I had wanted to escape, but I had ended up dismantling a prison I didn't even know I was trapped in. I was free. But I knew that freedom came with a price. I could never go back to being the person I was. That version of me, the daughter who always put everyone else before herself, had died the moment I realized they were trying to discard me. I was a stranger to my own past now, and that was the greatest gift I could have ever received. 6 months later, I walked into a small cafe in a city 300 miles away from where I grew up. The air felt different here, lighter, cleaner. I wasn't using my real name, and I had built a life that was entirely my own design, brick by brick. I picked up the local newspaper. On the front page, there was a small, inconspicuous article about the conclusion of the trial. My parents had received significant prison sentences, and Julian had been given a shorter term for his secondary role in the fraud. The family business had been liquidated to pay back the government and the creditors they had defrauded. Everything they had fought to keep, the house, the cars, the reputation, was gone, auctioned off to settle the debts they had created. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out the window. People walked past, completely unaware that I was the woman who had brought down a local criminal empire. That was the beauty of it. They didn't know me. They didn't have expectations of me. I was just another face in the crowd, living a life that didn't require me to be a savior, a victim, or a tool. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, old photograph, the only one I had kept from my childhood. It was a picture of me, young and smiling, before I knew what a safety net actually cost. I held it for a moment, then tore it into tiny pieces and dropped it into the trash. I was no longer the missing girl. I wasn't the daughter they had tried to erase. I was simply the woman who had walked through the fire and chosen to keep walking on the other side. My past was a closed book, and for the first time, I was excited to see what the next chapter held for someone who was finally, truly free. I thought I had moved on. But the past has a way of leaving long shadows. Just as I was settling into my new life, I received a cryptic package at my new address, an address only 3 people in the world were supposed to know. There was no return address. Inside, I found a single, antique key and a note handwritten in a style I hadn't seen since I was a child. It was my father's handwriting, but the tone was different, frightened, almost pleading. They didn't just use you to launder money, Elena. They used you to hide something much larger, something that wasn't just financial. If you want to know why they really wanted you gone, use this key at the terminal. Don't trust the lawyers. Don't trust the police. They are all watching. My hands trembled as I held the key. I had spent months thinking I had defeated them, but the reality was that I had only scratched the surface of a much deeper, more dangerous game. They hadn't just been stealing money, they had been acting as placeholders for a syndicate that didn't tolerate loose ends. I looked at the key, then at the quiet, peaceful street outside my cafe window. The freedom I thought I had achieved suddenly felt very fragile. If my father was warning me, it meant the people they were working for were now turning their attention toward me. I realized that my decision to end it at the police station might have just put a target on my back that I couldn't simply walk away from. I stood up, left my coffee untouched, and headed to my car. I had a destination in mind, a place I hadn't visited in years, where the truth was buried beneath years of silence. I drove for 6 hours. Heading toward an abandoned storage terminal in the old industrial district, a place where my father used to store business equipment during my childhood. My heart was racing, but this time, there was no hesitation. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was the hunter. I arrived at the terminal, the air thick with dust and the smell of rusted metal. I found the locker corresponding to the key. As the lock clicked open, I didn't find money or documents. I found a secure, encrypted server drive and a physical logbook. The logbook contained every name, every Shell account, and, most chillingly, the names of high-ranking officials who had been protecting my parents' operation for years. They hadn't just been stealing, they had been providing services to a shadow organization that controlled local infrastructure contracts. The reason they wanted me missing wasn't just to freeze my assets, it was because I had inadvertently become the legal owner of a holding company that was being used to sign off on illegal environmental waste dumping. They needed me gone so they could forge my signature and move the liabilities onto my name before the inevitable collapse. I sat on the cold concrete floor, a grim smile touching my lips. I pulled out my phone and did the one thing I had been warned not to do. I didn't call the police, and I didn't call a lawyer. I logged into a secure press server I had prepared weeks ago, just in case, and uploaded the entire drive, metadata included. Within minutes, The data hit every major news outlet and federal watchdog agency in the country. The digital trail was undeniable, and it implicated everyone: my parents, the officials, and the shadow syndicate. I left the drive there, walked out of the terminal, and climbed into my car. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the warehouse. I knew that by dawn, the world I had left behind would be in total chaos. I didn't care about the money, the house, or the family name. I had set the fire that burned down their world, and for the first time in my life, I felt the cool, clean air of a future that finally belonged to no one but me. The missing girl was gone, and the woman who replaced her was finally, permanently, free.